He saved animals for a living. Dr. Stephen Milner was a respected veterinarian in Oregon City, running his own successful practice, treating sick dogs and cats, earning the trust of families across the community. But when it came to the man standing between him and the woman he loved, he became a cold-blooded killer. For 6 years he stalked them. He planted GPS tracking devices on their car, sent hundreds of love letters, crawled under their vehicle in the middle of the night, and violated restraining orders over and over again. And when she still wouldn't love him back, he walked into a parking garage in Hillsboro, Oregon, and snapped her husband's neck. This is the story of obsession that turned into one of the most calculated murders Oregon has ever seen. Oregon City, Oregon, January 27, 2023. Kenny Fandrich was 56 years old and lived in Hillsboro, Oregon. He was a working man who showed up to his job every day, drove a black Honda Civic, and did everything he could to provide for his family. He was married to Tanya Fandrich, and their marriage had lasted for many years, though it hadn't always been easy. Kenny was known by those close to him as hardworking and dedicated, the kind of guy who kept his head down and tried to do the right thing. On the morning of January 27, 2023, Kenny woke up and prepared for what he thought would be just another normal workday. He got dressed, grabbed his tools, and drove to the parking garage in Hillsboro, where he always parked before his shift. Nothing about that morning stood out to him. He had no idea that he would never make it home. Kenny's life had been anything but calm in the years leading up to that day. His marriage to Tanya had been through rough patches. There had been alcohol, arguments, and times when it felt like everything was falling apart. Kenny had struggled with drinking, and that struggle had led to fights between him and Tanya. At one point, things got so bad that Kenny was arrested for driving under the influence and spent time in jail. The tension in their marriage had reached a breaking point. But despite all of that, Kenny and Tanya were working to rebuild their relationship. They were trying to move past the affair Tanya had with her boss, a veterinarian named Stephen Milner. That affair had ended years earlier, but Stephen never let it go. And for the past 6 years, Kenny and Tanya had been living in constant fear of what Stephen might do next. The fear wasn't just in their heads. It was real, documented, and escalating. Kenny had filed multiple protective orders against Stephen, trying to create some legal barrier between his family and the man who refused to leave them alone. In March of 2022, almost a full year before his death, Kenny called 911 because someone was following him to work. When police pulled the vehicle over, it was Stephen Milner behind the wheel. Stephen told the officer that he was trying to talk to Kenny about money his wife owed him and that he had been a friend of Tanya's for 20 years. The officer gave Stephen a stern warning and told him to leave them alone, that he was very close to going to jail for stalking. Stephen responded by saying that Kenny was going to kill Tanya, that she was going to die if someone didn't step in. The officer didn't arrest him that day, but the interaction was captured on body camera, and it would later become a key piece of evidence in this crime case. Kenny wasn't just dealing with phone calls and chance encounters. The stalking was invasive, constant, and terrifying. Stephen had planted GPS tracking devices on Kenny's car multiple times. The first time it happened was back in October of 2017, when Kenny and Tanya got a notification from their home security camera showing someone crawling under Kenny's vehicle in the middle of the night. They didn't know what the person was doing, so they called the Clackamas County Bomb Squad just to be safe. Thankfully, there was no bomb, but they did find a GPS tracker attached to the car. When police confronted Stephen about it, he told them he was only trying to protect Tanya from her abusive husband. Because Kenny had a history of domestic violence incidents, the police believed Stephen's story and let him go with just a warning. But Stephen didn't stop. In the summer of 2018, he was caught on camera again, this time planting a condom in Kenny's car, likely trying to make it look like Kenny was cheating on Tanya. When that plan didn't work, Stephen showed up at Kenny's front door and confronted him directly. Kenny came outside, and according to Stephen, Kenny threatened to cut him into 1,000 pieces if he didn't stop chasing his wife. Stephen's response? He leaned in and kissed Kenny on the cheek to defuse the situation. After that incident, Kenny filed a protective order against Stephen, but even with a court order in place, Stephen continued to harass them. He violated that protective order at least 7 times. In August of 2022, just a few months before the murder, Stephen was caught planting yet another GPS tracker on Kenny's car and was finally charged with violating the order. He was granted bond and released while he awaited trial. Around the same time, Kenny filed a civil lawsuit against Stephen, demanding $245,000 for the emotional distress and the many invasions of privacy he had endured over the past 5 years. Kenny told police more than once that Stephen was going to kill Tanya. He said, "He is going to kill her. She is going to die." But what Kenny didn't know was that Stephen wasn't planning to kill Tanya. He was planning to kill Kenny. How long can you live in fear before it destroys you? Before we continue with this story, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support is what allows us to keep telling these important stories and bringing awareness to cases like this one. While you're here, let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments below. It's incredible to see our community span the globe, all united in seeking justice. Dr. Stephen Milner was a highly respected veterinarian in Oregon City. He opened Milner Veterinary Hospital in 2000 and built it from the ground up into one of the most trusted animal clinics in the area. He marketed himself as a kind, empathetic country vet who genuinely cared about the animals he treated. His slogan was "Where pets are family," and that message resonated with pet owners across Oregon. Stephen had a reputation as a skilled surgeon and a thorough diagnostician. He was the kind of vet who would go the extra mile, offering alternative treatments that didn't require heavy medication or chemicals if he thought it was better for the animal. On the surface, he was exactly what you'd want in a veterinarian, someone who treated your pet like it was his own. But his personal life told a very different story. By 2017, Stephen's second marriage was falling apart. His wife had moved out, and they were heading toward divorce. He was struggling, and he needed someone to talk to. That someone turned out to be Tanya Fandrich. Tanya was one of the first employees Stephen hired when he opened the clinic back in 2000. She worked as a veterinary technician, and for 17 years, the two of them worked side by side, 6 days a week, building the practice together. Stephen would tell Tanya that the clinic was as much hers as it was his. They had a close working relationship, and over time, that relationship became a friendship. Tanya trusted Stephen, and Stephen relied on her. But in 2017, that dynamic started to shift. Stephen's marriage was crumbling, and at the exact same time, Tanya's marriage to Kenny was under serious strain. Kenny had just been arrested for driving under the influence and was thrown in jail. Tanya was embarrassed, frustrated, and questioning whether her marriage could survive. She confided in Stephen about what was going on at home. She told him that Kenny was drinking heavily and that they were fighting constantly. According to Tanya, the fights would sometimes turn physical, with pushing and shoving, usually when she tried to pour out Kenny's alcohol after he had too much. Stephen listened, and he sympathized. He told Tanya about his own failing marriage, and the two of them began commiserating with each other about their situations. That commiseration turned into flirting, and that flirting turned into a full-on affair. Tanya and Stephen began seeing each other outside of work. She would go to his house, and they became romantically involved. During this time, Tanya continued to tell Stephen about the problems in her marriage, including the allegations of abuse. Stephen saw himself as her protector, the man who could give her the life she deserved. He tried to convince her to leave Kenny and be with him instead. But before Tanya could make that decision, Kenny caught her. He showed up at Stephen's house and found them together. The affair was exposed, and it ended immediately. Tanya chose to stay with Kenny and work on her marriage. For her, the affair was over, and she wanted to move forward. But for Stephen, it was just the beginning. He couldn't let go. After the affair ended, Tanya said it became hard to even do her job because Stephen was always around. He would follow her through the treatment area at the clinic, hang out near her workspace, and constantly try to talk to her. He was always trying to convince her that he was better for her than Kenny, that she should be with him instead. He refused to accept that she had made her choice. Stephen began sending Tanya love letters, one after another, pouring out his feelings and trying to win her back. When those letters didn't work, he escalated. He sent a letter to Kenny, calling him out for being abusive and accusing him of mistreating Tanya. The letter also included a photoshopped image of Kenny with a random woman and child, suggesting that Kenny had some sort of secret double life that he was hiding from Tanya. The entire thing was fabricated, designed to plant doubt in Tanya's mind and push her away from Kenny. But the letter didn't work. Tanya and Kenny stayed together, and Stephen's frustration only grew. In October of 2017, things took a darker turn. Kenny and Tanya received a notification from their home security camera showing movement near their driveway. When they checked the footage, they saw someone crawling under Kenny's vehicle in the middle of the night. They had no idea what the person was doing, and they were terrified that it might be a bomb. They contacted the Clackamas County Bomb Squad, and a team came out to inspect the car. Thankfully, there was no explosive device, but they did find something. A GPS tracking device had been attached to the underside of Kenny's car. Police confronted Stephen about it, and he admitted that he had placed the tracker there. But he told them he was only doing it to protect Tanya from her abusive husband. He said he was worried about her safety and wanted to keep tabs on where Kenny was going. Because Kenny had a documented history of domestic violence incidents, the police believed Stephen's explanation. They gave him a warning and let him go without pressing charges. Stephen had gotten away with it, but he didn't stop. In the summer of 2018, Stephen was caught on camera again, this time planting a condom in Kenny's car. The plan was clear. He wanted to make it look like Kenny was cheating on Tanya, hoping that if she thought Kenny was unfaithful, she would finally leave him. But the plan failed. Tanya didn't believe it, and she stayed with Kenny. Stephen's desperation was growing, and he decided to take a more direct approach. He showed up at Kenny's front door and confronted him face to face. Kenny came outside, and according to Stephen, Kenny was angry. He told Stephen to stop chasing his wife, and he threatened to cut Stephen into 1,000 pieces if he didn't back off. Stephen's response was bizarre. He leaned in and kissed Kenny on the cheek, claiming later that he did it to defuse the situation. After that encounter, Kenny had enough. He filed a protective order against Stephen, hoping that a court order would finally put an end to the harassment. But it didn't. On January 27, 2023, Kenny Fandrich arrived at the parking garage in Hillsboro, Oregon, just like he did every workday. He pulled his black Honda Civic into his usual spot, grabbed his tools, and headed to his shift. Nothing about that morning felt off, but hours before Kenny even arrived, someone else had already been there. A masked man entered the parking garage and began systematically spray painting surveillance cameras. He knew exactly where most of the cameras were located, moving from one to the next with purpose and precision. This wasn't random. It was carefully planned. But the man missed a few cameras that were less visible or harder to reach. Those cameras would end up being critical. After finishing his work, the masked man left the garage in a blue Buick sedan. At 1:13 p.m., a maroon minivan entered the parking garage and parked directly beside Kenny's Honda Civic. Hours passed. Kenny finished his shift and walked back to his car, completely unaware of what was waiting for him. The surveillance footage, though partially obstructed by spray paint, captured the moment Kenny's headlights flashed as he unlocked his vehicle. Moments later, Kenny was attacked. He disappeared into the back of the maroon minivan. His car's headlights began flashing over and over again, a sign that something violent was happening inside that van. Then, the flashing stopped. 10 minutes later, there was movement near the vehicles, and the maroon minivan drove away, exiting the parking garage. Kenny Fandrich was dead. Hours later, Tanya called the police to report that her husband was missing. She told the dispatcher, "I called him, couldn't get a hold of him, and he always answered, always took my call." She said it wasn't like Kenny to ignore her calls, and she was worried. Tanya told the police that Kenny always shared his phone location with her, and according to the app, his phone was still at his workplace. The police agreed to go to the parking garage to check on him. When they arrived, they found Kenny brutally murdered in the driver's seat of his black Honda Civic. His neck appeared to be broken, and his face was blue. It was clear that he had been dead for hours. Not long after the discovery, Tanya arrived at the scene. She could immediately tell by the officer's reaction that something bad had happened. She started panicking, asking what was going on, but the police didn't want to confirm her worst fears until EMS had officially pronounced Kenny dead. A few minutes later, the officers broke the news to her. Tanya broke down, saying over and over, "This can't be happening. This can't be real." But it was real. Kenny was gone. After the initial shock wore off, police sat down with Tanya to ask her some questions. That's when she told them something that immediately caught their attention. She said, "He has a stalker." Tanya explained the long history between her, Kenny, and Dr. Stephen Milner. She told them about the affair, the harassment, the GPS trackers, the love letters, the protective orders, and the years of fear they had been living with. Police pulled up body cam footage from March of 2022, less than a year earlier, when Stephen had been pulled over for following Kenny to work. In that footage, Officer Edwards from the Hillsboro Police Department asked Stephen why he was following Kenny. Stephen responded, "I'm trying to get money out of his wife and I've been trying to talk to him about it." When the officer asked what his role in the situation was, Stephen said, "She's been a friend for 20 years. The officer gave Stephen a stern warning, telling him to leave them alone and that he was very close to going to jail for stalking. Stephen's response was chilling. He said, "He is going to kill her. She is going to die." Now, 11 months later, it was Kenny who was dead. Police began putting together a timeline of Stephen's harassment. It had been going on for 6 years, from 2017 to 2023. Multiple protective orders had been filed, and Stephen had violated them at least 7 times. In August of 2022, just months before the murder, Stephen was caught planting another GPS tracker on Kenny's car and was finally charged with violating the protective order. He was granted bond and released while he awaited trial. Around the same time, Kenny had filed a $245,000 civil lawsuit against Stephen for emotional distress and invasion of privacy. Stephen was facing serious legal consequences, and investigators believe that pressure may have pushed him to take drastic action. Detectives began reviewing all available surveillance footage from the parking garage. They found the footage of the masked man spray painting the cameras, and they immediately knew this was premeditated. But then the parking garage staff told them something that made the case even more disturbing. This wasn't the first time someone had spray painted their cameras. About a month earlier, in December of 2022, someone had done the exact same thing. The footage from December showed a man wearing almost the exact same outfit, using the exact same method, and in that earlier footage, there was a critical clue. Right between the man's eyes, there was a deep forehead crease, a distinct facial feature. Detectives compared that crease to photos of Stephen Milner. It was a match. Stephen had a defining deep-set wrinkle between his eyebrows, and it was clearly visible in the December footage. This wasn't just one attempt. Stephen had been planning this for at least a month, possibly longer. Investigators then used GPS location data to trace Stephen's movements on the day of the murder. Hours before the attack, Stephen was captured on surveillance parking his white SUV in a Home Depot parking lot. He then got out of his SUV and got into a maroon minivan, the same maroon minivan that would later be seen in the parking garage where Kenny was killed. The minivan left the Home Depot parking lot and headed in the direction of Kenny's workplace. Stephen had everything planned out. Detectives kept digging. They pulled footage from a month before the murder and found Stephen doing something similar. He parked his white SUV in the same Home Depot parking lot, but this time he got into a blue Buick sedan. The same blue Buick that was seen leaving the parking garage moments after the cameras were spray painted. Stephen then parked the Buick in the middle of the parking lot, got out, and walked toward the Home Depot. He entered the store, spent a few minutes shopping, and then paid at the self-checkout. He left the store with a new pair of sunglasses. Those sunglasses matched the ones he was wearing in the footage when he spray painted the cameras. He was also wearing the same boots and potentially the same jeans. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Investigators executed a search warrant on Stephen's home, and what they found was deeply disturbing. On his bedside table, they discovered what they described as a shrine to Tanya. There were framed photos of her, love notes, cards from when they were together, and several pairs of her underwear. They also found a life-size cardboard cutout of Stephen posing as a muscular, shirtless man with a paw print tattoo on his chest. It was bizarre, but after further investigation, detectives determined that the cardboard cutout had nothing to do with the murder. It was just another sign of Stephen's obsession. The detectives' main concern now was finding the maroon minivan. That vehicle likely contained forensic evidence from the murder, including DNA, fingerprints, or traces of the struggle. They tracked it down and discovered that the van had been found abandoned on the side of a highway just a few days after the murder. It had been towed and eventually sold to a scrap metal company. By the time detectives reached out to the scrapyard, it was too late. The minivan had already been completely demolished. All of the potential forensic evidence was gone. It was a major setback, but investigators were still confident they had more than enough to prosecute Stephen Milner. They had surveillance footage, GPS data, Home Depot receipts, and a 6-year documented history of stalking and harassment. The case was strong, and they were ready to move forward. On January 31st, 2023, just 4 days after Kenny's murder, Stephen Milner was pulled over into a parking lot by law enforcement. A detective approached his vehicle and said, "Roll down the window. I'm Detective Davis, Sheriff's Office." Stephen complied. The detective informed him that everything was being recorded by body camera and that he was being detained. Investigators were coming to talk to him. Stephen was told to step out of the vehicle and put his hands behind his back. He was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, stalking, and violating Kenny's protective order. Stephen was booked into the Washington County Jail and denied bond. While Stephen was in custody, police noticed something odd. He had poorly applied makeup on his nose, clearly trying to cover something up. When the makeup was removed, it revealed a small scratch. Detectives believe this was a defensive wound sustained during the attack on Kenny. It was another piece of evidence linking Stephen to the crime. The case against Stephen continued to build. Crime lab results came back showing that Stephen's DNA had been found on Kenny's hands. The prosecution believed this was the nail in the coffin. It proved that there had been physical contact between Stephen and Kenny at the time of the murder. Combined with the years of documented harassment and stalking, the surveillance footage showing the planning and execution of the crime, the GPS data placing Stephen at the scene, the Home Depot purchases that matched the outfit worn by the masked man, and the facial features that matched Stephen's deep forehead crease, the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors were confident they had everything they needed to convict him. Stephen's trial began in January of 2025, almost 2 years after Kenny's death. The prosecution took the jury through the entire 6-year timeline of harassment that Stephen had put Kenny and Tanya through. They showed the surveillance footage of Stephen spray painting the cameras, the GPS data proving he was at the scene, and the Home Depot receipts showing he purchased the sunglasses he wore during the crime. They presented the DNA evidence and walked the jury through every violation of the protective orders. The case was thorough, methodical, and damning. But when the prosecution rested, the defense did something unexpected. They called Stephen Milner himself to the stand. Stephen had decided to testify in his own defense, and he had an explanation for everything. Stephen told the jury that his affair with Tanya had lasted much longer than she was willing to admit. He said, "It was a romantic relationship. I was very afraid for her by then." He claimed that Tanya had more bruises over time and that she was trying to leave Kenny but couldn't make that final break. According to Stephen, Kenny kept talking her into staying and she was trapped. Stephen said that, in the beginning, he didn't realize how dangerous Kenny was, but by the middle of 2018, he started getting very concerned. He told the jury that he felt a sense of responsibility to protect the woman he loved, even after she left his veterinary practice and cut off contact with him. He admitted that he had been following Kenny, but he claimed it wasn't to hurt him. He said he was trying to catch Kenny driving after his DUI conviction because Kenny had lost his license, and Stephen wanted to get him arrested. When asked why it was his responsibility to enforce traffic laws, Stephen replied, "I was trying to keep Tanya from getting killed." Then Stephen explained what happened on January 27, 2023. He said it was just another attempt to get Kenny arrested, nothing more. But according to Stephen, things went wrong. He claimed that when Kenny came back to his car after work, Kenny realized that Stephen was sitting in the maroon minivan parked next to him. Stephen said that Kenny opened the van door and began attacking him. He told the jury, "Basically, we fought for a little bit. There was pushing and shoving. Eventually, I was able to kind of push him up against the car and then shove him into the car. I was pushing on him on his chest, and I may have pushed on his neck, I don't know. It happened really quickly." Stephen insisted that he was in the van minding his own business when Kenny attacked him, and that the fight was fast and chaotic. He looked directly at the jury and said, "I absolutely was not intending to kill Kenny Fandrich." He wanted them to believe that this was self-defense, that he was the victim, and that Kenny's death was a tragic accident. The prosecution found Stephen's story to be absurd. During cross-examination, they tore it apart. They pointed out that the idea of someone breaking their neck by being pushed into their own car made no sense. The force required to snap someone's neck is significant, and it doesn't happen by accident during a simple shove. They also highlighted Stephen's actions immediately after the murder. The prosecutor asked, "Where did you park after leaving the garage?" Stephen answered, "At Sunnyside Hospital." The prosecutor asked, "Why did you need to do that?" Stephen said, "I was getting rid of the car, the van." The prosecutor pressed further. "Why?" Stephen responded, "Because I just drove it to a place where somebody died." The prosecutor asked, "So you were trying to cover up that you were there?" Stephen admitted, "Yes." Then came the final blow. The prosecutor asked, "Even though it was self-defense?" Stephen had no answer. He sat in silence. If it was truly self-defense, why would he need to cover it up? Why would he abandon the van, spray paint cameras, and go to such great lengths to hide his involvement? The jury was left to answer those questions. The trial lasted 7 days. The jury heard all of the evidence, listened to Stephen's testimony, and watched the surveillance footage that captured his movements before and after the murder. After closing arguments, the jury was sent to deliberate. 6 hours later, they returned with their verdict. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to read the verdict forms. The judge asked the jury foreperson to confirm that they had reached a decision on all counts. The foreperson confirmed. The judge began reading. Count 1, murder in the second degree, guilty. Count 2, stalking, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, guilty. Stephen Milner was found guilty on all 7 charges. He showed no visible emotion as the verdicts were read, but his fate was sealed. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. Sentencing was scheduled for February 18, 2025. Before the judge handed down Stephen's sentence, Tanya Fandrich was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. She stood up, walked to the front of the courtroom, and addressed Stephen directly. Her voice was steady, but her words were filled with years of pain and anger. She said, "For years you tormented Kenny and me, leaving us as your victims. Now it is me standing here in front of you, and hear me clearly when I say I have witnessed your insatiable need to be seen as a hero, which you clearly are not." She looked directly at Stephen and continued, "I will never believe that you thought my life was in danger. You needed a defense for the savage and brutal way you killed Kenny." Tanya's voice didn't waver as she spoke about her husband. She said, "I love Kenny. We weren't perfect, but there was no shortage of love, commitment, and partnership between us, and you couldn't stand that." She finished her statement by looking at the judge and saying, "I ask and I pray that the judge gives you the maximum allowable sentence." The courtroom remained silent as Tanya returned to her seat. The judge then asked Stephen to stand. He looked at Stephen and said, "I'm sentencing you to lifetime imprisonment." Stephen Milner would never walk free again. He was immediately taken into custody and transported to the Snake River Correctional Institution in Ontario, Oregon, where he currently resides. After 6 years of harassment, stalking, and obsession that resulted in the needless death of Kenny Fandrich, Stephen Milner finally faced the consequences of his actions. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. And Kenny Fandrich was 56 years old when he was murdered in a parking garage in Hillsboro, Oregon. He didn't deserve to die that way. He spent the final years of his life living in constant fear, knowing that someone was watching him, following him, and refusing to leave him and his wife alone. Kenny filed multiple protective orders against Stephen Milner, but those orders weren't enough to keep him safe. In March of 2022, less than a year before his death, Kenny called 911 because someone was following him to work. When police pulled Stephen over, Kenny's worst fears were confirmed. Stephen was there, and he wasn't going to stop. Kenny told police more than once that Stephen was going to kill his wife. He said, "He is going to kill her, she is going to die." Kenny was trying to protect Tanya even while fearing for his own life. His marriage had problems, there's no question about that. There was alcohol, arguments, and mistakes on both sides. But Kenny and Tanya were working through it. They were trying to rebuild. And Kenny never got the chance to live without fear. He never got to see what life could have been like if Stephen had just let go. This crime case teaches us a hard lesson. Stalking is not love. It's control. It's an obsession. And it can turn deadly when the person doing the stalking refuses to accept rejection. Protective orders are important, but they only work if they're enforced. In this case, the warning signs were there for years. GPS trackers planted on Kenny's car. Love letters sent over and over. Protective orders violated at least 7 times. Stephen was given chances again and again. In 2017, police found the GPS tracker and let him go with a warning. In 2018, He was caught planting a condom in Kenny's car and still faced no serious consequences. In 2022, he was pulled over for following Kenny to work and was told to leave them alone. And even in August of 2022, when he was finally charged with violating the protective order, he was granted bond and released. The system failed to protect Kenny. Stephen's excuse during the trial was that he was protecting Tanya, that he felt a responsibility to keep her safe from her abusive husband. But that's manipulation, not justification. If someone truly can't accept no, if they can't let go even after years of rejection, they are dangerous. This case was solved because of technology. Surveillance cameras, GPS data, DNA evidence, and digital receipts all came together to expose Stephen's plan. And it was one missed camera, one angle that Stephen didn't spray paint, that captured the critical evidence and exposed the entire murder plot. Stephen Milner spent 6 years stalking Kenny and Tanya. He planted tracking devices, sent hundreds of love letters, violated protective orders, and planned a murder in a parking garage. When he finally stood trial, he claimed self-defense. The jury didn't buy it. What do you think goes through someone's mind when obsession turns into murder? How does someone convince themselves they're the hero while planning to kill? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The family can at least have the closure of knowing that justice was served. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. These cases need to be told. These victims need to be remembered. Your engagement helps us continue bringing awareness to cases that demand justice. And speaking of cases that will leave you speechless, our next video covers the story of a nurse and former homecoming queen who planned the perfect murder. She shot her husband while he slept, staged a burglary, hid the weapon in a pond, and called 911 with chilling calmness. But one crucial mistake exposed everything. When investigators told her the pond needed to be drained, she panicked and returned to retrieve the gun, not knowing hidden cameras were watching her every move. This is a story that will shock you from start to finish. You absolutely need to see this. Click the video on your screen right now to watch it. Until next time, stay safe out there.